Hi, this is Jacob Hawkins, and I'm presenting on our 6th Interactive Advanced Concept presentation for General Chemistry 1. So this week we are going to be making a pasta rocket, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a like jet fuel rocket type thing with a piece of pasta. So I had to trial this a few times before I could get it right. So the kind of experiment setup that we were given involved obviously like a jar, a container, hydrogen peroxide, and then yeast. And then those two things will obviously be the reactants. And then, what the procedure was to have a lid with a hole in it, cap the jar once those two things are in there, put a tubular piece of pasta in, and then light the pasta on fire. What I found is that, try as I might, I experimented with different types of lids, but I feel like I was making the hole too large. I couldn't kind of contain that to the exact right size of the pasta. And I think that was allowing too much gas to kind of release from other areas. At least that's my theory. So I actually found I had great success when I replaced this lid with a tinfoil lid that I made with a rubber band just to add a nice seal on there. So that's what we're going to be doing right now. So I'm going to do this from two views. I will set up the experiment now, and I will kind of get it kicking off. And then we'll pause, and then I will show the reaction again, but from a different vantage point, just so you can kind of see what's happening like inside the jar. So there were not specific amounts given for the hydrogen peroxide, so I'm just going to use, I'm going to eyeball it and use roughly the amount that I used previously with success. So about this much. All right, and then I'm going to be adding a tablespoon of yeast. And right away, we're going to get this lid on before it starts to bubble too much. Oops. Let me grab another rubber band. We're going to get a nice seal on this guy. All right, and it might be hard to see from this view, but the yeast is already kind of starting to fizz. The more you shake it up, obviously, the more it kind of starts to activate and react because, you're increasing the surface area of the yeast that is coming in contact with the hydrogen peroxide. So now what we're going to do is take our tubular pasta and just poke that right through. Another reason why this actually worked really well. You can just put it right through rather than drill a hole. And we are going to light it on fire. When I did this previously, I kind of had to hold the flame here for a little bit of time before it reacted, so we might have to do that again. And I think that's really just because I had to give it time for the reaction to reach a point, I guess, within the jar that, the flame would catch. Because it's obviously the fuel is the gas that's being produced by the yeast and the hydrogen peroxide. All right, and it's starting. Try to give it a fighting chance here. All right, so it's kicking off. I'm going to now pause and switch so that we can kind of see the reaction from a better angle. So stay tuned for the next video. All right, so we're back. So you can see that it's now really kicking off. So we have down here, let me see if I can get my finger in the frame. So the hydrogen peroxide is mixing with the yeast, and that's obviously causing some kind of gas to build. And that is just setting this pasta noodle ablaze. So it's obviously feeding off of the gas. I should also add, because I am putting this on YouTube, I do have safety precautions. I have a smother blanket here, a wet towel, and I also do have a fire extinguisher off camera in case anything were to go bad. But I've done this a few times now, and it wasn't that bad. All right, so I'm just gonna let this die then, and on the next slide, we'll kind of talk about what's going on with the reaction and why it's happening, and we will close out the presentation. All right, so let's talk about what was going on with that pasta rocket. So within the jar, the actual chemical reaction that was happening involved two reactants. You had hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, and then also baker's yeast. So what was happening is we mixed those two things together, and then oxygen was being produced as the H2O2 was broken down by the yeast. So this is known as catalytic decomposition, which is a chemical reaction involving the decomposition of something through the aid of a catalyst. So H2O2 decomposes when it's in contact with an enzyme called catalase, which is in the yeast, to produce water and then pure oxygen. So I have this reaction kind of written out here as an equation. So let's say you have 2H2O2, you add the yeast, and then that catalyst is acting upon it, and then that's going to produce 2H2O and then pure oxygen O2. Another comment to make that I didn't say in the video is this reaction is exothermic, which means it releases thermal energy or some type of energy. And this was really apparent because when I was holding that jar, it was very, very warm to the touch. I was surprised by how warm it got. And once again, that's because it is releasing energy. So in terms of the pasta and the flame, what's going on there? So oxygen is not in itself flammable, but it definitely will fuel a flame. So what something needs in order to burn, you need to have some kind of solid fuel. So in this case, that was the carbohydrates that were in the pasta. And those were reacting with that pure oxygen. They were oxidizing, and that's what produced that really big jet flame. And the reason, if you were just to take a piece of pasta and try to light it almost like a matchstick, just without the oxygen coming out of the jar, and it wouldn't really light up that same way because the oxygen in the air that we breathe is not the same thing as that pure oxygen that was being built up in that jar. The instructions were also to discuss what kind of bonded structures were being produced in this reaction. So looking at our two products, H2O and then oxygen. So H2O is an example of a covalent bond, which is a type of bond between atoms where valence electrons are being shared. And then O2 is also a covalent bond, but more specifically, it's a double bond, which is when two pairs of electrons are shared between two atoms. So that is it. That is the pasta rocket experiment. I can safely say that my apartment now smells like a bakery. It really smells like a mixture of yeast and burnt toast. But this was a fun experiment, and I look forward to seeing what everyone else got up to with this pasta rocket experiment.